You're watching Strat News Global, and joining us now from Vienna in Austria is Vilna Chakarova. She's the director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. Vilna, thank you so much for your time. It's, of course, not a good time to talk to you in terms of the events that have happened over the last 24 hours. But how do you see it in terms of Europe? We've seen in France, in Spain, in Germany, other countries where there have been terrorist attacks. But Austria has not seen something like it saw over the last day.
Indeed, thank you for having me. And indeed, this attack was the worst terrorist attack in Austria since very long time. And it was also probably the first to be inspired by the Islamic State terrorist militia on Austrian soil. Now, according to our interior minister, it is by far the hardest day for Austria, for the country in many, many years. And to be honest, Austria has been in fact perceived as the island of the blessed. This is a saying that we have here in Austria. It was in fact spared from terrorist attacks, similar to the ones conducted in France, Belgium, or UK, if you like. And thus, of course, the timing, which was probably well selected. Let me tell you very shortly, it was just hours before introducing the second lockdown. It was a very warm evening, not typical for this time of the year. So the streets were full, it was crowded, the restaurants, it was certainly the effect that the perpetrator sought. And of course, it led to more casualties. So this altogether put Austria suddenly in this, fortunately, network of violence of jihadists. And now Austria, unfortunately, is also in the headlines as being, related to Islamist atrocities, such as the ones that you've named. That also, of course, means that in future, probably other similar attacks might be possible on Austrian soil.
Like you're pointing out, the timing seems very significant, just 4 hours or so before the lockdown. So you wouldn't have got those crowds out possibly if you had waited a little longer. But the background that has been given by Austrian authorities, including, like you said, the interior minister, is an Islamic State sympathizer, suspected Islamic State sympathizer in his 20s with Austrian and North Macedonian citizenship, but also had been convicted, I think, for 19 months last year and let off because he convinced authorities that he had been de-radicalized. The interior minister already saying that a review of those policies might be warranted, like has happened in so many other European countries and even in the UK.
Indeed, as you mentioned, the perpetrator was well known to the authorities. He was also one of those Islamists who wanted to travel to Syria, to the caliphate. He, in fact, made it even to Turkey, but then in 2019, he was imprisoned in Austria for 7.5 months for membership in a terrorist organization. And like you pointed out, he, in fact, was more or less indoctrinated into this particular ideology of ISIS. Now, he also grew up in Austria, like you said, to parents from North Macedonia. For our viewers, this is a small country in the Western Balkans. There has been an ongoing, let's put it that way, radicalization by certain ideologies from different backgrounds. And somehow he managed to go through the system. So he, in fact, was also in the situation that when he was sentenced to 22 months in prison, he in fact so he managed to convince actually the system to get freed, and that was, of course, had, of course, deadly consequences. Probably, well, this is, of course, open for debate, and this is something that is going to happen once all operations are closed. There will be probably discussion as to how to reform the system. He, for instance, was considered a young adult, so thus he fell under the privileges of the Juvenile Court Act. He was only 20 years old. And probably there will be a discussion, I guess, as to how to reform this system and to actually not allow this kind of radicalization among younger members of the Austrian society to get filtered, so to say, through the system, and then, of course, to be unable to conduct this kind of gruesome terror acts.
The Chancellor Kurz has given an address to the nation, and there he clearly said this is not about Christians versus Muslims. This is not about migrants versus Austrians. It's about those the many who believe in peace against the very few who believe in war. But considering the political planks that the Chancellor came into power with, do you think that after the operation is over, when a post-mortem is done and when policies are made, that anything would change in Austria?
It will change in terms of my expectations that there will be a debate. There must be a kind of a debate regarding this topic. But let's be honest, the debate has been already in place when it comes to the distinguishing between Islam as a religion and political Islam as a dangerous ideology. And here the Austrian government is very clear that the one has nothing to do with the other. So antagonizing a whole group of the society based on religion is an absolute no-go. But then again, the radical part, which is the political Islam, is going to be certainly addressed. And there is already an approach by the government in terms of monitoring social media, trying to collect data, and research regarding religiously motivated political extremism. And this is going to be continued. So there will be a discussion on that matter, and the Austrian government, but not only the Austrian government, I expect that European governments will have to tackle these issues more concretely and more actively.
How do you see it in the context of what's been happening in the recent past, especially in France? We've seen at least 2 terror incidents there in the last week or so. And President Macron and his statements and how that has been taken by many of the Islamic countries. How do you see that in context of what's happened in Austria?
In Austria. Now, on the one side, it is, of course, about our European understanding when it comes to freedoms and rights. And this is something that the French President Macron addressed very clearly, that when it comes to freedom of expression, equality between women and men, and further actually advantages of what he called the Enlightenment, this is part of our European DNA, so to say. And of course, in this context, I expect that there will be more responses coming from not only the European governments, but by the way, the European Commission, because the European Commission announced that the European way of life must be protected and must be promoted within, of course, the borders of the European Union. Now, on the other side, of course, there will be reactions. But let me point out that first and foremost, this kind of radical ideas and this kind of indoctrination is not a coherent phenomenon. We are actually talking about different networks with, within various terrorist groups. And that is why I think that there is not going to be a coherent response. But what we are going to observe is, unfortunately, more or less various and they will be also different in their scope and, in the timing, acts of terrorism. So this is something that is unfortunately here to stay as a phenomenon, and is also something that all European member states have identified as a security threat in their doctrines and in their foreign security and defense policies.
You're talking about reactions, and it's interesting to see the difference in reaction, say, from Turkey to what President Macron has been saying and doing. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Turkey has condemned what happened in Austria. It's not been so virulent or strident. You see a difference in those kind of reactions, whether it's from Turkey or other Islamic majority countries, to what President Macron has said and done, and what's happening in Austria?
Well, the current tensions between Turkey and France have very deep geopolitical roots, and are not to be located at the surface of, the current verbal exchanges and the blaming and all the other political rhetoric. But these are serious, long term oriented geopolitical issues. Just let me name the case of Libya or the case of the Eastern Mediterranean area, where both countries are basically defending more or less the conflict, different conflict parties. Okay, so this is just another important layer in their, so to say, bilateral conflict. Now, when it comes to Austria, Austria is also quite in a conflictual situation or relation with Ankara. It has been also blocking negotiations in terms of the European Union membership. So I expect that there will be some sort of political rhetoric, but it's not going to be related now to this particular case. Like I said, the perpetrators' motives were identified already. There is no direct link to Turkey. So I suppose that, like I said, the one which is more long-term oriented and is going to be an issue between Europe and Turkey anyway, so long as Erdogan is, trying to solidify his leadership within the country and is going to be more and more assertive in the direct neighborhood of Turkey. This is going to be certainly a case for further diplomatic, but also geopolitical and security issues.
You talked about authorities who had already, before this incident, started increasing monitoring of social media and other things as well, that to prevent such attacks. Chancellor Kurz, if I'm not mistaken, also came into power on the plank of, or would raise the issue of migrants. Am I correct about that?
Well, it's not a secret that the Austrian government, the previous Austrian government, was critical of the way how the migration crisis has been tackled, and specifically when it comes to the repercussions coming out from the migration crisis, because once again, of course, the dependency in certain way on Turkey to stabilize the crisis. There was an agreement, a deal between the European Union and Ankara, and of course this doesn't fit really well into the foreign and security policy agenda of Austria. So this was one issue, of course, where they, of course, were sensitized about potential risks coming out from, from migration. Uncontrolled migration. But on the other side, let me point out that the Austrian society was very, very friendly. And when it comes to the, welcoming asylums and migrants, and actually there were no really serious cases of, or any serious, situations in that time since the crisis was tackled. But this very, let's say, hard position has remained, and Austria emerged as a sort of, specifically the Austrian chancellor, as a sort of a kind of an island which managed to also bring in other partners, allies, if you like, when it comes to the view on future migration. So this issue is still there. It's going to be dealt with in some way, in one way or another. Right now, at least for the last few years, there has been a kind of a stability when it comes to these particular migration flows that were relevant for Austria. Now they moved to another areas which was expected with the tensions emerging from Libya. So like I said, one way or another, this will be an issue that will, affect and determine the European politics in the future, and all political decision makers everywhere in Europe will have to, deal with it. So I don't think that this is particularly now the moment for it, or that this particular terror attack will actually unleash another, very live discussion about migration in particular.
Sure. As you're pointing out, this is probably the worst incident in Austria's modern history. The only incidents in the past we've seen this year, I think there were Kurdish and Turkish organizations which had street violence, or there was a church that was vandalized. You're pointing out again how Austrian society has been welcoming of migrants, which again, I think, if I'm not wrong in terms of figures, about a third of Austria has migrant roots. You don't see any backlash in Austria against after this incident.
Well, in fact, I expect, of course, backlashes in a certain way due to the fact that the whole discussion around Islam versus political Islam, what also the French President Macron actually opened up with his speeches. This had basically led to reactions in Europe and outside of Europe. I mean, that is beyond any doubt. And I expect that there will be, like I said, certain reactions. I cannot identify with certainty from which exact groups these reactions might come, which of course means that, and how radical the response will be. Like I said, what happened yesterday caught Austria by surprise. That is absolutely clear. And whether this is going to stay a single case, it's only time can tell. But what is certain is that once again, there's going to be public debate as to what kind of role also, if you like, minorities can contribute to bigger coherence of societies. Let me remind you that there were a lot of reactions coming out from the minorities. I myself am immigrant who is meanwhile Austrian citizen, has been living in Austria for more than 13 years. There are many like me. There are many second and third generation. So let's not put all in one, more or less in one pot. But let's identify the reality that there are also many members from the minorities that are not, who are not really, who are not feel very comfortable with this situation. So I think that most natural way of tackling the issue is first and foremost to actually single it out as a, as an act that is as such an absolutely unacceptable. It's not telling about the society. And then again, what, for instance, our terrorism experts say, it's very important also to keep going. That means also to not allow exactly this kind of radicalization and this kind of, ideology to create more polarization between the different groups of the society, which is actually one of the main ideas why they want to create fear and to create radicalization and to create dividing lines between the groups in order to, at certain moment, in order to accept that there's us and then there's the ones that are different from us, right? So we should not allow it to happen.
Elena Chakarova, thank you so much for your insight and helping us understand what's happening in Austria.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And you can get all the latest on our website. If you do like our kind of journalism, do support us and do follow us on our social media handles on Twitter, on Facebook, and Instagram. You've been watching Stat News Global. I'm Amit Abrevi.